And when I woke up this morning, I was feeling pretty dangerous.
And if we're talking tight ends and we're going into round 2, maybe round 3, give me Ian Thomas, please. Let's just do the damn thing.
Just based on giving his overall ability. Again, I like his arm. I think he can make every throw.
The pick at number 12 is in.
All right, we're back. Cover 1, the Draft Podcast. I'm Russell Brown, as always. Joining me, CP Christian Page. CP, how we doing, man?
Good. Excited that we got some postseason meaningful football now. Not saying the regular season wasn't meaningful, but definitely this Utah-Oregon game coming up here in the next, about an hour. Utah, man, they control their fate in their hands right now. In my opinion, they win, they're in, expecting LSU to beat Georgia.
If Utah gets in, I am going to be the biggest fanboy on the face of the earth, patting myself on the back, rightfully so. I mean, in August, nobody was picking Utah. I picked them first. Lee Corso followed suit, and here we are. They are on the brink of being in the college football playoff.
And there's proof to that. You said it on this very podcast.
Exactly.
Utah was one of your top 4 teams. So
exactly.
Definitely go back and you can check the records if you don't believe them.
Exactly. And if in my top 4 teams were Clemson, Ohio State, Alabama, and Utah. So 3 out of 4, not too bad. But again, if you guys want to go back and listen to those, all you have to do is rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Obviously, subscribing to the podcast needs to be the first thing that you do, and you can do it through Apple Podcasts. You can do it through Spotify. You can find us on YouTube, SoundCloud, and even Spreaker.com. So there's a ton of different ways to listen to us. So basically, any way you listen to a podcast, you can listen to us. We're on everything. So be sure to find us, download us, and listen. And you can go back. It's sometime in August when we put it together. And it was a fun episode. But yeah. So we'll get into some of the college football conference championship games. We won't get into too much detail on them because honestly, the players are who they are at this point. I think we've done a hell of a job talking about most of the 5, 6, 7 teams that are really fighting for the college football playoff at this point. I think we've talked enough about a lot of the players. So we will give more so like our predictions for the games, some things that we're expecting for those games. But I want to start in a different direction. I want to start with a certain player, a player that you are a big fan of, and it's not just because you're a graduate of Auburn University. He's a talented player. He's a player that is a difference maker in every aspect of being a defensive lineman, and that's Derrick Brown out of Auburn. He was your second-ranked player in the preseason back in August. Here we are. I don't think much has changed for you, and I think really he solidified your point of having him in your top 3, and he's moved into my top 3, and I think we're at this point of, yeah, he's a top 10 talent. That's given. He's a top 5 talent. I think you can make that case, but I really want to push the needle here, and I really want to say, is he top 3? He's a top 3 player in this draft, and it's really, yes or no, and why. And I think, we're both going to be saying the same thing here, but I want to ask you, is he a top 3 player?
100%. And when you have top 3 player billing, that means you are a game changer. And if you go back and watch the Iron Bowl, Steve Sarkisian, Alabama offensive coordinator, did an incredible job with the young QB, Mac Jones, and Najee Harris, who's a guy that's definitely climbed up the ladder as far as draft stock goes with the LSU and Auburn game performances. But we can get into that some other time. But Sarkisian game planned, and this is maybe just paying more respects to Auburn's defensive line itself, but I think more importantly, and focus more on Derrick Brown, he liked to play the perimeter. Now, though, Derrick Brown is very agile, a very lateral mover in space as well. But you saw that he affected the Alabama game plan. Now, did it work a little bit for Alabama? Absolutely, because they attacked the perimeter. They made Auburn's DBs come up, and then they wanted to go over the top and pass the ball in some play action moments as well. But I think that alone, just not even getting into the physical attributes of what he is, which we've talked about almost every week at length, just watching coaches scheme around him tells you all you need to know about how dominant and how much of a game changer Derrick Brown is.
Yeah, and it's like I don't want to do it, but I'm going to freaking do it because it's our podcast, and I really don't care what anybody says. He's got that Aaron Donald type of impact on the game. He's a type of player that every single week you have to scheme for. It's like J.J. Watt, and it's like Chris Jones in Kansas City for the Chiefs. It's like Fletcher Cox. I mean, he has that type of upside, that type of ability. And I'm not saying he's, that player, or that's his pro comparison. It's not like that. Remember that picture last year of David Montgomery? He's got the agility of Sony Michel and this and that. It's not that, but it's a guy that has that type of impact. And eventually, whether you take him at 9th overall, 15th overall, he eventually becomes a top 3 player in that draft class. So in my opinion, if you're a top 3 team in the draft order, why not just take the guy? Get him, because he's going to make a difference. And that's if you have a need. If you have the need for it. If you have a stacked defensive line, then obviously don't worry about it. Don't draft the guy. Don't really worry about it. Obviously, it's a plus if you take him, because I feel like in football you can never have too many defensive linemen or offensive linemen. But again, I can understand why some teams might not want him at 2 or 3 because of you have a lot of depth at defensive tackle or whatever. But generally speaking, he is just dominant. Like you said, you scheme around him, and whether it's double teams he's fighting off, or even if he gets in that phone booth and he's matched up with somebody one-on-one, he is consistently penetrating the offensive line. He's penetrating the backfield. He is winning the line of scrimmage battle every single time. And it's just, it can't be unnoticed anymore. And I think back when they played LSU, and he went off. He had, a couple tackles for loss, a sack, 7 tackles or so. I think people really were like, wait a minute, he's doing this against LSU. We're 8 weeks in. No offense, folks, but we kind of forgot about him. And I think that's what the general consensus seemed like, oh, Derrick Brown's so dominant, he never really had this. Well, that's a lie, because we've been talking about this dominance since the summer. We've been talking about it all year long. So I think people just kind of want to just overlook players because they have their eyes on other players. And I'm guilty of that myself. I mean, Zach Moss is a prime example. Zach Moss, and we'll talk about him later, but he's not the same player as J.K. Dobbins. And that's just one of those things. I got caught up on Zach Moss so much that I kind of neglected a player like J.K. Dobbins. And then I go back and I look at, and I'm like, dude, J.K. Dobbins is freaking ridiculous. But yeah, so with Derrick Brown, I mean, his last 4 games, it's 6+ tackles or more. He's had a tackle for loss or more in every single game over the last 4 games. I mean, he's been consistent for Auburn, and I don't know exactly. I know 1 and 2 in the draft order. I know it's Cincinnati and the Giants. I want to say it's the Dolphins at 3. I could be wrong there, but I don't remember who's the 3rd pick of the draft. But on this Friday evening, but regardless, whoever's picking at 3. I feel like you got to take them. And I'll be honest, if the Detroit Lions do pick 5, 6, or 7, which is where they've been kind of speculated to go at this point of the year, if he's there, I kind of feel like you got to take him, right? Like if you're a team like the Lions, that you just need players up front on your defensive line. If you're the Atlanta Falcons, you more so need an edge rusher. But if Derrick Brown's there, and I think that's a good example, is you've got 2 teams like the Falcons and the Lions. They need edge rusher help, but a guy like Derrick Brown presents himself, you got to take him, right?
Oh, 100%. I mean, we've always been a strong believer in best player available. But Derrick Brown, unless you are stacked up with 2 Aaron Donalds on your team or 2 Chris Joneses or whoever it may be in your interior defensive line, he's going to fill a need that you may not have thought you needed at the time, but he's going to fill something there because he adds that much impact on all 3 downs. And I was speaking of Chris Jones there. That's who Derrick Brown reminds me of a lot. He has kind of that twitched up ability. I think Chris Jones may be a little more agile in his lower half, but I think they compare a lot physically. And I think just their style of play, being that interior pass rusher, showing a lot of technique in rushing the passer, becoming disengaged in the running game, and then playing on the edges and not having to come off the field. I think both of those guys really checked all the boxes. I think Derrick Brown at this moment where he is in his college scouting repertoire, I think he's a lot more advanced than Chris Jones was at that time. But if you go poll every single general manager right now and they say, hey, where would Chris Jones be drafted right now? I think you would have a lot saying in the top 5 to top 8 area, because he showed that improvement every single year. And he shows that, with some coaching, he can be an all-pro caliber player. Derrick Brown, again, like I said, at this point in his college career, he's more advanced than Chris Jones was. So I think that's high praise, and that's why he solidifies as a top 3 guy.
Agreed. I'm interested to see where his draft stock ends up, falling or solidifying itself, or wherever he ends up on consensus draft boards. But I'm with you. He's a top 3 player on my board. And speaking of big boards and draft boards, your draft board is out. Your most recent one. I'm currently in the works of one, and Chase Young, Derrick Brown, Joe Burrow are your top 3. I have the same thing, except for it's Chase Young, Joe Burrow, Derrick Brown. You got Jeffrey Okudah at 4 and Andrew Thomas at 5 with Jerry Jeudy at 6. Tristan Wirfs at 7. I really like Isaiah Simmons in the top 10 at 8. CeeDee Lamb at 9 as well. And Henry Ruggs at 10. And I'll be honest, I love Henry Ruggs. I really like him, and I think he's a top 15 player in this class. I don't have my board open, but I believe he was 12th or 13th on my board as I was going through everything. And the one that really surprised me was Yetur Gross-Matos at 13. What's your thoughts on him? Because you have him higher than A.J. Epinesa.
Right. And Epinesa –
it's one spot, by the way.
Right. Just one spot. Yeah, Gross-Matos at 13, Epinesa at 14. With Gross-Matos, in the preseason, I tagged him. I said he has all the physical ability. He's a very athletic, high motor caliber player, but he still needs to clean up some things technically as far as pass rushing goes. And he's done exactly that. He's actually been one of those players, you have going into the season. Well, you were talking about Zach Moss, one of those players that you kind of just key on a little harder. And so you kind of take note of just the little things that they do. And Gross-Matos has done an awesome job at developing just a more diverse pass rushing skill set. And so you're seeing that improvement. And I think when you see that improvement in his final year now, he now announced that he will forego his senior year and then go to the draft. When you see that improvement, I think you just have to project that he's also going to be somewhat improving in the NFL. So I still think there's a lot of untapped potential there. But from a physicality, athletic standpoint, from a mentality standpoint, on and off the field with his motor and just some of the things that he's had to overcome off the field, I think from a leadership standpoint too, he's checking a lot of boxes going forward, just even the span of these 12 games that we've seen him. And just talking about A.J. Epinesa, I kind of go hot and cold with him. I think he's a stud in the run game. He shows glimpses as, I guess, a consistent pass rusher is there. He will threaten the pocket. I don't necessarily think he is a guy that you 100% have to game plan against, as long as you just kind of go away from his side of the football or his side of the offensive line. I think you'll be just fine. But he does have a lot of physical ability, a lot of upper body strength, shows good extension. But I just think, he's I don't think he's that top 5 pass rusher or top 5 player that we had thought coming into the season. Obviously, he's not a bad football player. He's still in my top 15. I still think he's a top 20 player or top 20 pick when the draft comes around in 2020. But I think Yetur Gross-Matos has shown a lot more improvement, a lot more consistency over the course of the 12 games.
I can't really disagree. I'll be honest. I can't really disagree with you there. And with Epinesa, I mean, it's like he's been really consistent down the stretch here, but there has been those stretches of hot and cold flashes. And I think you're more so accurate as far as, he's not the top 5 player we thought he was. I think 14, top 15 is more realistic. As a Lion fan, it scares me because, they're picking 6th or 7th. They're going to probably end up pulling the trigger on him, maybe. And if a guy like Derrick Brown is available, then that just kind of like irks me a little bit, to be honest, because like we just mentioned, Derrick Brown's a top 3 guy, and you're taking a guy that, realistically speaking, is probably in that 10 to 15 range. So very interesting. But another name that really stood out in the next 2 are guys that obviously everybody knows about. I wrote about one of them. He's 19th on your board, J.K. Dobbins out of Ohio State. And if I'm looking at this correctly, Yes, he is your top-ranked running back. He is 19th on your board. I love myself some J.K. Dobbins. I've always liked J.K. Dobbins ever since I first watched him at Ohio State 3 years ago against Indiana. He's 19th on your board. What do you love about him, and why is he now your top-ranked back?
Yeah, I'm just going to read straight off what I have on the post. A heavy hitter with plenty of pop behind his pads, appreciated vision to execute interior and off-tackle runs, has promise as a pass catcher with reliable hands and receiving instincts, and enough wiggle to consistently elude contact. And something that, I mean, it kind of says it right there at the end, but he has really good contact balance. I know you were posting videos in your article that was released this week talking about, I think there was one run in general where I think it only went for maybe 2 or 3 yard gains, but he showed a little bit of that cut in the back or in the backfield pretty much immediately when he got the snap. So he has that vision. He has that ability to quickly react to pressure if, things get muddy. And he also has, that ability to stay on his feet, keep that balance when contact is initiated. So, and I think the receiving game just only accentuates what he's capable of. But yeah, it's going to be really hard to not necessarily evaluate these running backs, but, when talking about the evergreen question that even if there's, hard statistical data to prove it one way or the other is a first round pick, should that be a running back? Because this year there's a handful of guys that could be first round running backs, but could probably also be available at pick 45, pick 50. Najee Harris, like I was saying, is a guy that, has come up, showed excellent a receiving ability against LSU and Auburn, showed a lot of potential, run between the tackles and outside. Travis Etienne still doing his thing. Jonathan Taylor, he's just been Mr. Consistent, and he's almost forgotten about a little bit. DeAndre Swift now comes up with a little bit of a shoulder injury, but he's another guy that has first-round capabilities, and that's just scratching the surface of a really strong running back class. But with Dobbins, I think he just does too many things well to really leave out of my top 20.
Honestly, I can't really disagree. I like Taylor a little bit more. I just think he's such a physical runner. The biggest concern for me is, it's always a concern, tread on the tires. Maybe I need to stop looking at that and just overlook it at this point, but he's got a ton of tread on his tires, but I still like him because he's a physical runner. It just seems like there's nothing he can't do. And as far as Dobbins, though, I mean, I seen the pro comparison of prime Ray Rice and everything else being thrown out there. And I honestly, I don't care about pro comps, but I get kind of like a Dalvin Cook vibe to J.K. Dobbins. I don't know what it is. I think it's more so that lateral ability. And I don't know if he's going to test great, like long speed wise and his track speed. Like, I don't think it's going to be, 4.3, 4.40. But if it is, holy hell. But I think it's going to be more like that 4.47, that 4.48, and he's going to be more of like that gamer, and that's because of what his hips do and what he can do laterally with his choppy feet and just the vision and what he does between the tackles. And he's phenomenal, and he might even be a little bit better than Dalvin Cook was coming out of Florida State, to be honest. I personally think so. So another name was Michael Pittman, and then we'll move on. But he was number 20, and I was a little surprised to see him up there. I have him in my top 35. I like Michael Pittman a great deal at 6'4", 220. I'm talking about vibes of a player that I get. I kind of get a Mike Evans type of vibe from him. I don't know if it's wrong to say that. I don't say he's the 7th best player in the draft and he's going to go 7th overall like Mike Evans did. But, I really like him. I don't think he's got the track speed, but he can high point the football. He's got good body control. But what do you like about him, obviously, just going off of your notes?
Yeah, he's one of those guys that when you come into a game, or I guess if you're a quarterback, hey, throw me the ball, I'm going to be open. Mm-hmm. Like, he's always open. And it's not necessarily him gaining 5 to 8 yards of separation, which he doesn't always do because he's not that, quick twitch guy. He's not going to come, super quick off his breaks to gain that separation. But he's going to win the physical battles, and he's going to somehow be open downfield, whether it's just – I know I said he's not this twitchy lower body a guy that's going to get open, but one move, it just seems like one little hitch, he's open downfield, and he's going to constantly threaten all levels of the field. I think he's a consistent what was I going to say? He's a consistent guy that can threaten in the intermediate levels and the outside. He's a possession receiver. And again, he just seems like he always is open. He kind of has, and I know this is going to be a poor comparison in the sense of overall speed, but seeing what Chris Godwin has done this year with Tampa Bay. So you're going to go with one Tampa Bay receiver. I'm going to go with the other Tampa Bay receiver. But just watching him, operate on multiple levels of the field and just kind of having that my ball mentality, I think is just all kind of pluses for Michael Pittman. I also think he's a really good blocker on the exterior. He might be a little scheme dependent if you want to pigeonhole him as maybe a big slot. Again, I don't necessarily think that accentuates his skill set, but I think he should play on the outside. You should, constantly test the longer parts of the secondary just with his ability to play downfield. But Michael Pittman consistently, these last few games, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but he's, catching 7-8 balls, over 100 yards, a couple touchdowns here and there. The guy's just been so dominant for an offense that is, I don't want to say struggled, but that's needed something, and USC would be a lot worse. There's no way they have 8 wins without Michael Pittman on the field.
Yeah, no, yeah, for sure, 100%. He's bailed those freshman quarterbacks out so many times, it's ridiculous. I love it. You guys can check this out over at cover1.net. It's a top 40. I promise you guys mine is on the way. I will get cracking on it. I got to get it in this format that CP has. I love it. And it'll make it a lot more simplified for me so I don't have to go on and on with paragraphs about guys because I tend to do that, I know. But yeah, you guys can check this out over at cover1.net. You can also download the Cover One app for free. Just simply search Cover One in your app store, however you go about getting your apps on your mobile devices, handheld devices like iPads and everything else. Just search Cover One. You'll find it. We've got you covered, and you can check out this great big board by CP. But moving forward, I do want to get to some quick news and notes of the NFL draft. We've had some guys declare for the draft, one recently while we've been on the air, and that is Washington tight end Hunter Bryant. He announced today that he will be going pro. He will be going to the NFL, and he has entered the NFL draft. And I'm going to be honest, I am writing about him actually not at this very moment, but when we finish this up, I will get back to my article on him. Hunter Bryant has been playing his best football of his career for Washington, 52 receptions, 820 receiving yards, and 3 touchdowns on the year. He's looked like a solid tight end, probably going to move into the top 2 or top 3 category for tight ends behind Bryson Hopkins, of course, out of Purdue. Another name as well, C.J. Henderson, the corner from Florida. He's declared for the NFL draft. We've talked about him quite a bit at the start of the year. He's kind of fallen off. He's fallen behind guys like Jeffrey Okudah and Christian Fulton out of LSU. And rightfully so. Those guys seem to be a little bit more superior. But Henderson, to me, is still probably going to be a top 75 pick. It'd feel like maybe even a top 50, but with so many skilled guys, he might fall down the draft a little bit on day 2 and fall into that top 75 category. And then the last one that I saw was, where did it go? Don't mind me. Darius Stills, defensive lineman out of West Virginia. He will not be going pro. 6'1", 292, defensive lineman, primarily a nose tackle. He is going to stay at West Virginia in return for his senior season. So that could be a guy that we see next year at the Senior Bowl. So next week we'll get more into detail about the Shrine Game, the Senior Bowl, and all those players. I feel like we need to give kind of an in-depth analysis of a lot of those players that are there. But let's get into the conference championship games that are going to be kicking off within the next 45 minutes. Utah-Oregon is tonight in Santa Clara, California. Utah-Oregon, what's your thoughts on this game, and how do you see it playing out?
This is the time where I think we really figure out, I don't want to say how good Utah's defense is, because I know nationally they have been pretty much top 2, top 3 in pretty much every major defensive statistical category. But just seeing all those, we joke and talk about, all the defensive players that are going to the Senior Bowl from Utah. But there's a reason. These guys are studs. You got Bradley Anai on the edge. You got Lecky Fotu in the interior. Jalen Johnson, who's the one junior pretty much just not getting many of the accolades. He's had a really solid season as well. You got Blackman in the secondary. There's a ton of guys. And, of course, they got their work cut out for them for C.J. Verdell at running back for Oregon. A couple of other Oregon skilled players. And, of course, Justin Herbert, who's been okay this season. I know if you look at the box score, it looks like he's had an outstanding season. But I think we were still waiting to be awed a little bit as being maybe that number one overall pick. And I think he's just still kind of left us like, well, he works, but, is he really going to be that guy that we're going to put, all our chips on the table for? And I think he may answer some of that tonight. But I think the grudge match of Utah's D-line and Oregon's very highly reputable offensive line, that's going to be the matchup I'm looking most forward to.
Yeah, and I think with Herbert too is the expectations were so high for him because he came back for his senior year, and it was more so coming back to, yes, get his degree. He shows that he's a smart kid, but I think it was more so about money, and he wanted to solidify himself as a top one pick. He wanted to be the first overall pick, and nobody expected this from Joe Burrow. I don't care what anybody says, and Joe Burrow's outshined him. Tua would certainly be in the conversation had he not gotten hurt, and he's probably still in the conversation. And in my opinion, that's saying something. If teams are willing to take a look at Tua after the lower body injuries that he has sustained, plus now this hip injury, over Justin Herbert, who outside of 2 shoulder injuries in his career has been relatively healthy, I think that's saying something. I think that says something about Herbert, and he's just been far too inconsistent these last 2 weeks. I mean, yes, he's completing 67% of his passes, but against Arizona State, he looked like a lost man out there. That was one of his worst games I think I've ever seen, and I think that really shows a lot of the lows with him. But if you watch his game against, USC, it was a quick passing game. They were very efficient. He completed almost 81% of his passes, and I think he had 3 or 4 touchdowns in that game. But at the same time, that was the quick passing game. Is that going to work at the next level? Is that going to translate? Because he's still got to work on getting through those progressions and not staring down those initial reads. And that's where I think the other quarterback, Tyler Huntley for Utah, is far superior. Now, I'm not saying Tyler Huntley is better than Justin Herbert because I think that would be silly. But I think as far as where we are right now at the standpoint of going through your progressions, the footwork, his ability to maneuver in and out of the pocket, and really some of just the touch and the ball placement that he has down the field. The tools are there for Tyler Huntley to, I think, be coveted in the NFL, but he's been very, very accurate this year. He's completing almost 76% of his passes, and he's only had 250 pass attempts, but of those 250, almost 85% of them have been on target this year. So we're talking about a couple of drops, or maybe the receiver has it in his hands and the defensive back knocks it away. But 85% is an incredibly high rate, one of the highest rates in college football. You add in the top 3 defense in the nation with Utah. I have a hard time believing that Justin Herbert's going to thrive tonight, and I have a hard time believing that Oregon's going to win. It could be close. It could be 31-28. But I wouldn't be surprised if it was something along the lines of 31-14 with Herbert struggling a little bit in this game and maybe just Oregon not getting off into the right foot because of maybe a turnover or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I certainly agree. Huntley he's a fun evaluation. Sure, he might give you a couple of, well, why'd you do that when we know what you're capable of? I mean, that's quarterback scouting 101. But at the end of the day, Huntley, he kind of has that, and I think we talked about it last week. He kind of has that modern-day NFL look to him in the sense where he operates in a multiple offense. You'll see him take snaps under center. You'll see him take snaps in the gun, and you just see him read and really manipulate the secondary, which is so much fun. And, of course, he can make a lot of plays, not necessarily just tucking the ball and running, but his pocket mobility that you touched on briefly is definitely one of the best in this class. So this could be Huntley's, I guess, audition for maybe, top 7, top 8, maybe a little higher as far as the best quarterbacks in the 2020 class.
Yeah, and I would have no issues with it. And it's going to bring me to a question that we'll end the show on. But, I obviously want to talk briefly about some of the other games. But Oklahoma, Baylor tomorrow. And I'm going to be honest with you folks. LSU, Georgia, there's no need to touch on it. Joe Burrow's playing way too high of football for me to believe that Georgia's going to – their defense is suddenly going to emerge. The only player that I'm going to watch from their defense is J.R. Reed because of Burrow throwing the football. I'm curious of what he does as a safety against the vertical passing game that they have at LSU. Outside of that, there's not much to really talk about, folks. I don't see LSU losing that game. But Baylor, Oklahoma, and really the two games that we're talking about, Baylor, Oklahoma, Utah, Oregon, are really the two games that have an impact on the college football playoff. No offense to Virginia. Bryce Perkins is a really nice quarterback. I don't see them competing with Clemson. I like Joe Reed, their wide receiver, but again, they don't have Bryce Hall. Trevor Lawrence has been putting together another good season, and even though the Clemson offense started at a very tough pace on the start of the year, they've figured it out. Travis Etienne not having exactly the year that I think any of us thought he was going to have. I don't even think he has 200 carries on the season, but T. Higgins is having a great year, and Clemson is going to be in the college football playoff. And then you got Baylor, Oklahoma, though, and that's 7-6. Oklahoma came back from 28-3. I don't know if they come back from 28-3 if they're down this time, but I would have to think they're not going to be down 28-3.
No, not at all. I mean, I think this is one of those games where it's like, hey, you kind of fooled us once, but you're not going to fool us twice, because Oklahoma, they have something, a little more it to them. And I just don't see Baylor as the team that can really overthrow them in this sense, because Jalen Hurts, I know in that game, I think he had 3 turnovers, and that was pretty much the reason why they were down so big. And I just don't see Jalen Hurts making too many mental and physical errors to keep Baylor in this football game. No disrespect to Baylor and Matt Rule. They have performed my expectations and pretty much everybody else's expectations. But I think Oklahoma is just too good on both sides of the football game to make this look like a game it was the last time they matched up.
Yeah, and I mean, the spread on this game is 9, and I think it's 9 for a reason, to be quite honest. And maybe it's to get people to bet Baylor, but I think that's just simply people, or that's simply Vegas wants people to bet Baylor because of how close the game was last time. And I think it's going to be probably a 10 to 14 point difference this time with Oklahoma winning this game. Jalen Hurts, I think, is going to turn it on. And Jalen Hurts, you can't ask for anything better for him out of this season. Over 1,200 yards rushing, 18 touchdowns. It's practically a running back. I think he's outperformed, actually, Travis Etienne as a runner, if you would count it as statistically. And then you've got him just through the air, 3,400 passing yards, 31 touchdowns. He's done a great job. But I'm going to be honest, Justin Herbert threw for 31 touchdowns. Jalen Hurts threw for 31 touchdowns. No offense to Justin Herbert, but you throwing for 31 touchdowns is great, but it doesn't really mean anything. Jalen Hurts did it as well, and I like Jalen Hurts. So that brings me to my question of because I did not tell CP what this question was going to be before the show, and oftentimes we just kind of spitball and we just get on the show and we start talking. But Jalen Hurts has far more superior talent compared to Tyler Huntley. But I think where Tyler Huntley is with his tools of progressing through the pocket, giving himself a clean platform to throw from consistently, the way that he can zip the football in there, and I'm not saying Jalen Hurts can, but just from that standpoint, if you get into late day 2, day 3 of the draft, because that's where I think that those guys are going to end up going. Maybe Jalen Hurts moves up some boards a little bit, but if you get to that part of the draft, are you going to go with the kind of the higher ceiling type of player, or are you going to go with maybe the ready-made guy like Tyler Huntley, who might be more of like a manageable game manager or a more of a game manager compared to Jalen Hurts, who has that starting quarterback upside? But I think Huntley does as well. But I guess really it's with what you know from Huntley and what you like about Huntley and what you know you need to work on with Jalen Hurts, is what you need to work with Jalen Hurts far more superior and far more difficult to deal with compared to Tyler Huntley? Does that make sense? Does my question make sense? I butchered the whole thing.
No, I know what you're saying. And to be honest, I think from what's between the ears and reading certain offenses, I favor Huntley on your question. Now, based on, the start to finish in their career and, where I want my team to be at a certain amount of time, like Jalen Hurts, I think would still be the answer to the end-all, be-all, the whole entire question. But I don't think it's far off of a question that some people may be thinking because, again, like we were talking about how you diagnosed in your article about Huntley, and a couple of other people have pointed out too, just the ability to just manipulate the secondary and to just really think on his feet. Not saying Jalen Hurts can't do that, but I think we've seen them in offenses where he doesn't really have to, and that doesn't really take anything away from him. But I think Huntley's a little more prepared in that situation. So sure, will Hurts be able to maybe do something because he's more of a gifted runner and a physical athlete than Huntley is? Maybe he has more success early. But I think Huntley, just what we've seen on film and what's in between the ears as just a pocket passer, I think he may be a little pure in that element to really make that a hard decision.
I can agree with that. I really thought the question was going to be better, I guess, but it was still a good question. I don't care. And then lastly, Ohio State, Wisconsin. So, and just to confirm, you're picking Utah, you're picking Oklahoma, you're picking LSU, and then on this one, Ohio State, Wisconsin. What are we expecting? And I mean, I don't really think we need to know who to watch in the game. I think it's pretty evident on who to watch at this point.
It's hard to really expect anything different than what we saw before, with Ohio State winning by, 3-4 touchdowns, whatever it may be. I turned it off pretty much at halftime in the first matchup. But Ohio State, they're just too good right now, in my opinion. I mean, sure, Michigan showed some worth in the first half, but then Ohio State's like, no, we're not going to let this happen. We're going to show them who's boss, and we're going to be like, we're the number one team in college football for a reason. And to be honest, even though they are the number one team in football now, I think this is also a resume game for them. So don't expect them to really get their foot off the brakes until they're probably past 40, because I think they still need every ounce of style points to solidify that number one spot, especially assuming LSU beats Georgia and probably beats Georgia pretty handily. That's the number 4 team in college football. Even though Wisconsin's right around the top 10, I definitely a resume builder if Ohio State can really accentuate their offensive skill set and their defensive skill set with another big win over Wisconsin. So give me Ohio State to kind of solidify that number one ranking and get some style points in this one.
I'm with you. I really think it's going to be Ohio State as well. I nothing against Wisconsin. I mean, I like Jonathan Taylor a lot, but just Ohio State is just far more superior. They're far more talented. They have way too much talent on both sides of the football for me to believe otherwise at this point in time. So I really like them. And yeah, LSU as well. I like LSU. I like Oklahoma. I like Utah, and I like Ohio State and Clemson. So I think that's what it's going to be. I think the real conversation will start at 4 after Georgia loses, and is it going to be Utah or is it going to be Oklahoma for the 4th spot? And I personally think it's got to be Utah, just simply because I think they're the better team. I think they're a better team defensively, but they're not the splashy team, and I think that might hurt them a little bit. I think teams will want to watch, a Jalen Hurts against a Trevor Lawrence compared to a Tyler Huntley against a Trevor Lawrence, or against a Joe Burrow, but I don't know. Time will tell. I would be shocked if Jake Fromm and DeAndre Swift and, Monty Rice and J.R. Reed and the guys that are on Georgia, for them to beat LSU. I would be completely shocked.
I just don't think they have the personnel to do it, because, they've lost their 2 top receivers. DeAndre Swift isn't playing. Jake Fromm has looked really bad. So I just don't – they just simply, to me, even though LSU has shown some vulnerabilities on defense, Georgia does not have enough offensive firepower to even score in the deep 20s to make this special. Because I know Georgia's defense statistically has been pretty solid throughout this whole year. But you're going to give up probably 30 points to Joe Burrow in this receiving corps. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who's had an awesome season. This offensive line that's been pretty promising. So Georgia just does not have enough offensively to win.
Yeah, I agree. So we'll see what happens. It's going to be a great weekend of football. I can't wait to watch it. It's unfortunate that it's coming to a close slowly, but that just means we're going to be busier as far as the draft content and the draft front of the podcast with more material. But can't wait to do it. Can't wait to watch the games here in 30 minutes. But CP, If you don't have anything else to add, I certainly don't. I think we hit plenty of stuff. And again, guys, you guys can check out his new draft board on cover1.net. You can also check out my recent articles on Gary Gooch from Colorado, J.K. Dobbins out of Ohio State, and Tyler Huntley of Utah. I brought in a ton of film for those ones, so you guys can check all that stuff out at cover1.net. But if you're good, I'm good, my man.
I'm good. Have a good weekend.
Yeah, you too. Enjoy the football. Guys, until next week, this is Cover One, the NFL Draft Podcast.